Hello again. So I am back here with an idea, a concept. See, in my work, my side work, the side work I have created in order to best suit my truest self, it has two functions. It has the work aspect, which is the trying to convey how it is our consciousness works, why it works that way, and what it implies that it does work that way. But in order to have work like that, you also have to have a dream. And when I dream in this work, it is about how I can utilize the insights I'm generating to make the world what everybody seems to think it should be, which is better. How do you take meditation on an explanation of consciousness and use that to build something tangible in this world? When you talk about consciousness, when that is what you meditate on, when you take that work seriously, there are certain big questions that you can't answer. One is that question of fallen world. If our species has fallen, what was it prior to what it is now? Okay, and that kind of research has a lot of big problems. Julian Jaynes did probably the most comprehensive work on what our consciousness looked like prior to what we understand in his breakdown of Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. What he and evolutionists and anthropologists and archaeologists have in common for a problem is that they're examining all this evidence scattered throughout our world, and they're trying to piece together a history. They are building a footprint. They're explaining a footprint. They're trying to comprehend what that footprint means for what has come before us. The problem with that is that footprints don't look like boots. So they get some of the flavor, some of the circumstance, some of the history, but they miss everything else that was involved at the time. Now I'm talking about consciousness here. So for my reasoning, it makes the most logical sense to fit history and to fit the current structure of the human brain if the fall signifies some kind of separation. I theorize that before this fall, there was a collective consciousness. Jaynes put it, we were otherly directed via audio hallucination, verbal hallucinations. I don't know what that footprint represents as the boot that made it. But my guess is we were once far more collective consciousness than we are now. And the Secret History of the World and Christianity both address this, in that there was once a structure for us, according to both of these. And as we grew, changed, and evolved, we became far more isolated inside of ourselves. Our consciousness became individual. That is an individual consciousness trapped inside your skull that is, if you believe in creation, representative of what created us. Made in its image. If you believe we evolved, I'm a mind before matter person. I believe that mind existed before matter ever did. That it was the mind that was required in order for matter to exist. Whereas the opposing view is matter before mind. Macroevolution, things started primordial and gradually and slowly worked up to here. I don't subscribe to that. So what is it, somebody with an origin of mind before matter, who studies consciousness, who dreams of taking that work and making an impact of good on the world? Well, to follow that same storyline, according to Christianity and the secret history of the world, all of these acts and prophecies and even magic and all of these things contributed to one specific time in our history, about 2,000 years ago, where, according to the secret history, the great engine of our solar system needed to be pressed into service in order to make this time happen. As we were becoming far more isolated inside our skulls, the ability to appreciate what we had was diminishing to the point that it was becoming worthless. And at that time, all of this energy was pressed into service to give us an understanding of our interior life and tools to cope with it. Empathy, love. What has happened since then is our slowly adapting to make those new functions, 2,000-year-old new functions of empathy and love, into something that is ingrained in us, that we understand. And just curious, just the curiosity I wonder about sometimes. This has nothing to do with what, I'm just off on a tangent here, but what if that history is true? And originally, when we were more socially conscious, when we were more collectively conscious, there were miraculous things like miracles, magic, interactions with beings that understood far more than us, or a being. What if we had all of that and we didn't have the capacity to fully appreciate it? So, like humans always do, we utilized it in the wrong way and bad shit happened. But then we come to this period where we don't have that, the magic and the direct communication with beings higher than ourselves. But we have this materialistic drive that is allowing us to discover the deepest workings of this creation or this environment. We've discovered our first replicator in genes, DNA. We've now discovered our second replicator in memes or consciousness. I suspect strongly that when it comes to energy breakthroughs, there's going to be a third or fourth, or depending on when it's discovered, there is another replicator somewhere to be found in energy generation. I'm almost certain of that. What if all of this understanding and appreciation for were blended into a world that actually had magic? What if, according to the secret history, we'll be going through this period for a couple thousand years, and then we will gain that understanding generated in this period will help us to better understand and utilize what comes next, long after we're dead. What if deep technical understanding actually were added to a world that had magic and miracles? Now, I'd probably look a lot like some of the weird shows we've made. Which brings me to a point. If you want to use consciousness to build a better world, what are the requirements of that? What is it that I need to do? What is it that the growth of consciousness actually looks like? If we were all once a collective consciousness, and we probably will all be again, what are the requirements for an additive nature to this universal consciousness? Is it just our thought that introduces something into consciousness? I think that could be best looked at if you think about the perfection of God. Was God perfect at the internet in 1920? My argument would be that unless some other race or some other unknown history invented the internet, then there was no need to be perfect at the internet for God at all. But then how does the invention of something new, a new connection that is made by us in our consciousness and then spread across the planet, where does that perfection in God come from? My suspicion is that all of these different people that are all interacting with or building or creating or spreading the internet, all of the thoughts that go through their consciousness, in other words, whether it's their aptitude or their insight, the way they can understand and manipulate through the tool that is the internet, or it's just one hell of a job of home row typing, all of these things are in individual consciousness, thus part of the collective, thus all the mistakes are made and understood, all the little details, and all the little blind corners, all the little nuances are understood because they are in consciousness. That is where the perfection of God comes from. That, if that is true, then that is most likely the purpose of creation. If I know it's blasphemous to think so, but if I were a perfect consciousness and I wanted to reproduce myself in an individual way, before he did that, was there anything like an internet? Would there have been anything like an internet in consciousness at all? Let alone a perfect version of it? So then, do I just need to think it to introduce it into consciousness? Is there power in speaking it privately, talking to yourself? Is there power in that? Does my verbalization of a connection I have just made in meditation have an additional effect to the growth or development of consciousness? I make the assumption that it does. And I think there's evidence for that. And I find that in our fiction, whether it would be books or television programs or streaming services, shorts, or these big shows that just go off the rails in popularity, I think that there is evidence that speaking it changes the effect that it can have. So if my speaking it, even aloud when meditating, if that has an additive growth to consciousness, how much more so then if I speak it here and people are exposed to it? It's the only thing that could make me do this is if the cumulative addition to our growth is made more effective. I know I'm rambling here. I try not to do these things to a schedule. I try not to do these things to feel like I need to do these things. Oh, I'm gaining popularity, I must do more. See, every time I try to do that, it just makes the work disingenuous. It feels fraudulent, like I'm missing the purpose and point of the work. So when I come to these things, I've got a billion ideas rattling around and shouting for, hey, share me. So I can ramble a little bit, just like I continue to do now. In my reasonings, it makes more of an impact to state things. If that is true, followed to its next logical step, sharing things here has a greater impact. So then the question is, what is it that you expect to get out of your ideas, your reasonings, and your work. How do you avoid traps? See, the problem with doing this, because I want to be more influential, is that in itself is a trap. Once you're doing a thing that you love for power or material gain, the material gain and the power gain in importance with the amount of influence you allow them to have on yourself. Until, if you allow it, you're just blind. So how to do it? How to take my understandings, share them in such a way that more people can be exposed to it. I did a talk on building a production company. I don't remember what ideas I gave for the production. I've got about 1 billion of these things, of things that could be made through a production company to expand the growth of consciousness. And this isn't just me. I'm seeing this in evidence in all of our fiction, at least the fiction I'm exposed to. There is clearly an arrow of progress that is trying to make itself successful, that's trying to make us better, trying to make us more empathetic, more reflective, more of that deep thinking. And at the same time, in our culture, we are legalizing things like THC, which, if used right, not to avoid pain, I mean, it's good for pain management. I'm not trying to espouse anything along those lines. I'm not even thinking about those lines. But what it's really good for is allowing us to focus and flow, meditate. If there is a higher percentage of people that are using that, learning to focus, learning to flow, and being exposed to a lot of our fiction nowadays, then it is quite possible that this kind of growth is taking place everywhere on my street and your street, in other countries around the world. So there is a base out there of people who are focused and thinking in the same direction as we are. That means it is more likely that what I'm saying here will find its way to ears similar to my own. So what can I do to capitalize on that power? I was meditating the last 5 weeks on a very specific problem. The problem for me that I was meditating on is, why is it the people that should be on my side, now that I have faith, now that I am mind before matter, why is it that the people that are on my side seem so different from me? Why is it when I ask about, why is it that if faith, love, or faith, I always get tongue-tied when I try to quote scripture. I feel like it's a territory I don't really belong in. But when I ask, why is it that the book says charity above all else, that is the most important, that is the most divine charity, I ask them, people I respect, who hold a mind before matter, faith-based perspective on this life, why is it I see this world when that is your most important focus? And their answer to me is that I don't understand the meaning of charity. All it really means is love. And that all it really means? What is the root of that right there? And if I can discover the root of that, can I help? one of the other things I realize is that it is difficult for us to understand the patience of God, the capacity for forgiveness of God. Why is it, if the world is as evil as you think it is, that God just doesn't come back right now? Why hasn't he come back for all these years, no matter how much bullshit we as humanity do? How can patience exist in such a form that this is still worth it? What is it in us that God still finds worthy of forgiveness, worthy of grace? What I suspect is that our capacity to understand the forgiveness of God, the compassion of God, is directly related to our ability to respect the creation. Now, I understand that there's an immediate trap right here. I tell you, a faith-based person, someone who believes mind before matter, that the reason you cannot understand the forgiveness and the capacity for grace in God is that you don't have proper respect for the creation. And the trap is, you think you do, because you love nature, you love animals, you love humans, you love your fellow mankind, but you don't have the respect for the creation when it comes to the humans, really. That fallen nature that is prevalent in faith, that idea that we are irredeemable even after redemption, that's what gets me. It's, if I am being proselytized to, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in any of that, and somebody is witnessing to me and they find a conversion in me, they are able to bring that about, what is changed in you after that conversion? If you are redeemed, if we are redeemed, what is it that causes that loathing for the redeemed? What is your work now that you've been redeemed? Is it just to be at the safe space and tag? Nothing can touch you, I've made it. All those poor souls that aren't with me at the safe place, but I'm safe. My work is done. What causes that? I think it's a lack of respect for the creation in a specific vulnerability, which is humans, mankind. There isn't proper respect amongst those of faith for this part of the creation. And I think that cause is rooted in what comes after the conversion. Because it isn't about anything more than personal growth at that point. I'm safe. How can I be assured of my safety? And I wonder if that's not one of the reasons why so many are praying for Armageddon. I'm safe. What can I do to continue my safety? Will I always be safe? Please, Lord, come now so I know I'm safe. I think that's the vulnerability. And in our stories, without my influence whatsoever, I see plenty of evidence that respect for this part of the creation is growing. We live in the most diverse and wondrous era of human storytelling that there has ever been, and that is only showing signs of continued growth. Sometimes they talk about the curve of technological growth or the curve of CO2 gas growth, whatever. But I don't very often hear about a curve for the growth of human consciousness. How many consciousnesses, whatever, how many of the individuals are growing at what rate in what direction? I think the best indicator for that is our stories. And I'm a little bit biased. I'm not distracted by news or sports. Those things just, especially sports, just never interested me. Statistical math bores the crap out of me. Anyways, so remember, the point is, if there is growth and understanding of consciousness in me, how much effect does it have just thinking about it? You might say none. Just having the thoughts has no effect. But then that's a lot of flashing. When I talk about flashing, I mean the things that are capable but fall by the wayside and have no effect. That means that all of the personal growth, all of the suffering that has occurred in our species, often at the hands of our species, all of that growth that had nowhere to go is just wasted. I mean, is it wasted when we turn on ourselves and sell ourselves into slavery? Because that's happened in every color there is on this planet. Skin tone is irrelevant. Is it wasted in isolation, where a tribe can exist for 1,000 years and then be wiped out and nobody even knew they existed? Is all that wasted? I don't think so. I don't think that it's wasted. I think that it's probably just more generic when added to the collective. But then speaking it, well, they were probably speaking it even though it went nowhere. Then speaking it in an arena like this, where it could go from this little place in Wisconsin to anywhere in the world, or, well, I don't know, how are we throwing these signals out into space still? So there has to be the work for me, of course, but there also has to be that dream. How to spread the dream in order to make the growth of the work faster, more productive. Which brings me back to the production company. There is enough data, and I've said this time and time again, there is enough data for us to understand the world we need to build for sustainability. We have all that in place. We have more than enough wealth to make it a reality. What we need is the will. Now, when I think about this long period of history that's undergoing, where we're all materialistic, our universe that we interact with is materialistic. When I think about the survival of spirituality through an era like that, the only thing that hits me that would allow it to survive and thrive is in little deeds. It was grand deeds, and now it's little deeds, and it will be little deeds for a while until we're ready for grand deeds again. So then, it should be my responsibility to give those little deeds an environment to thrive in, to guarantee or try to better guarantee the survival of hope. So I think the choice is clear. How to start building the new world is to show a representation of that real world. Since our fiction works best when there is a struggle, I think we're in the perfect place and time to actually make that story. I've shown you what the things are that need to build this new world. What I'm saying is a representation of it being built is probably the next logical step. Because it can't just be dreamers like me that actualize this. There's no way I could dream around enough corners to make it work by myself. So I have to influence other dreamers. I have to give them that nugget to build on for themselves so they can come up with the solutions that are particular to their skill sets. And this dramatization could be quite diverse. For instance, if there is a location where the new world is being built and designed, then there will be all kinds of struggles for it, from surrounding landowners to political wrangling and desires to legal. We'd have to go, in order to build this new world, we'd have to create new laws that enable us to build it. You could build law and order just around that one. You want to have your own dong-dong? Just with that. And I don't have the legal mind. I couldn't create those stories. But somebody out there can. You could just watch the catalog of John Oliver and find all the little problems that it is we would like to fix when we build this new world. Prisons. I can't write the fiction that is based around how we adapt the prison system we currently have to a better world. Day-to-day lives, I'm not really good at the domestics thinking. I tend to be a larger focused person. And to be honest, domestics tend to irritate me enough to where I don't want to think anymore about that subject. But clearly there are creative minds similar to mine that can. So what I'd propose for Build a Production Company as a project within that production company would be to show how it is we build this new world. With the understanding of consciousness in mind, so there should be a diversity of subject matter revolving around this building of a new world. Everything from, I've talked about it before, but there's this thing on Disney, the National Geographic channel, Earth Moods. I tend to meditate to I think it's the third or the second one. It's called Night Lights. I can just let that thing run, and beautiful images of our handiwork. People like me, I'm in construction, I build these things. Well, I paint them and make them look pretty. Anyways, it's just beautiful and it's really nice for meditation. But imagine if you could do that with theoretical builds of how we build this new world, how we contour the landscape via our infrastructure and the existing infrastructure, how we model. Like, will there one day be enormous tracts of lands with nothing but little sensors in wind cones so that we better understand how the air will flow, how we can sculpt for more airflow, how we can sculpt to get better energy generation, and then make it beautiful. Because the aesthetics of beauty are necessary for the dreamer. If I can show in a little short, musical, nice meditative piece of art how we have built to utilize everything, how you can, with our CG technology now, you can show what I imagine, the wind as it comes through our structures, how we change our structures, how once we find the right structures, we build for beauty, comfort. The problem with building for the growth of consciousness is the model we use right now is terrible for it. It is good for the growth of consciousness in the survival of the fittest sort of way. But once you understand how the environment works, survival of the fittest is something you need to overcome. How do you overcome consciousness driven by survival of the fittest? By creating an environment where actual organic growth of consciousness is that's the desired outcome. The actual organic growth of consciousness is what we are building for. Not work 60 hours a week, barely be able to afford rent, food, and utilities, and anything after that is ego. We have to build something that works a different way. I see a lot of evidence that this could work in shows that already exist. We seem to be going through a phase as our storytelling gets better where a lot of people are romanticizing this idea of the simple life. A lot of people are turning into barbarity, but with like things like Game of Thrones or The Witcher, the very simple life, terrible fucking things happening. A lot of butchery, a lot of blood. And that's us. I mean, in the words of John Crichton, storytelling through television replaced cockfighting for our species. So there's going to be a lot of that. But there's also this idealistic, simple life that's there. What would a society look like that was building for the growth of consciousness? What does the simple life look like when we have our material science, when we have antibiotics, when we have mass communications? Everyone on this planet can be connected. What does a simple life look like when the structures we walk on, from roads to sidewalks, can be used to charge and generate more energy? What does this world look like when our understanding of water purification and the diversity in ecosystems is actually brought to bear? When our focus is fixing that and maintaining that. Do you understand that the whole world is talking about this impact we're having on the environment? And rightfully, we should be focused on the negative impact we're having. But simultaneously, we can impact our environment. How is that not amazing? How is it that we can understand these ecosystems and understand how to how they work when they are rich and happily functioning? If we can understand it, we can replicate it. If we can understand that, we can, by virtue of growth of society, reverse desertification. If the growth of society is shaped this way, it becomes something that we want to do on a large scale. It expands and pushes back the damage we have done. How do you show a world like that, where consciousness is our main product? No longer our productivity and sacrificing our lives and muscles and bones and comfort just to survive. How do you show a world that's flipped on its head? I think this is the perfect time in our history to do it. It doesn't have to be limited. There are so many problems that will arise to build this world, and all of these things could be dramatized. All of these things can be shown. Dream it before you build it. If that's what it takes, then that's what it takes. There are two other factors that would be different now, or potentially could be different now, than they were when we were going through this simple existence that we once had. I'm going to name them both, but so racism and sexism. Racism is sort of like a very potent meme that generates itself through self-preservation, insecurity, and stupidity. It's not something that really interests me in tackling because the stupidity isn't my focus. But sexism on the other hand, when you watch our stories about ago, what is it you recognize about the role of women in our history? What would our history look like if we understand that at the outset and build knowing the weakness we had before? How many powerful women, and that respecting the creation comes into play here, because without proper respect for the human part of the creation, you don't understand the power humans have. And I'm not talking about construction or destructive power or the the ability to build and whatever. I'm talking about just spiritual energy. Half of our spiritual energy was being completely repressed for a very large swath of our history. What does building it look like if we don't do that stupidity? What does building an environment where consciousness and the reversal of our damage to better our lives, what does that look like if we don't chop half of our intelligence into irrelevancy? Respect of the creation, specifically the human part of the creation. I think that's what stagnates our growth. From my side, the faith-based, the mind before matter, that side. What does that world look like? Dream it before we build it. Somebody has to show the dream. What kind of comedies could be made out of living in that life? What are the punchlines of that environment? What does love look like when society is built around the growth and nurturing of consciousness? What does that look like? What does the new power structure look like? Where does power for the individual achievement originate in that environment? What gets those people that are just built for it? What gets them going? What are the results that lead to that kind of power? I think that's probably going to be our next step. I guess there's only one other thing I'd like to add. When I talk about the genuine nature of the work, trying to keep it genuine, I try to think of things like likes and shares and views as consequences rather than the goal. So I'm perfectly happy just doing the work. The attention isn't what I'm after. That shift in perspective, I think, is necessary for this kind of work to be spread out. If I was to be able to influence you in any way, it would be that all of that attention, for at least for people like me, is more of a consequence than a reward. The goal is the growth of consciousness. My imparting an idea or a concept or a dream to you that allows you to expand and deepen your understanding. That is the benefit. That's the point. That's the reason for the work. But I understand the world I live in. So when I originally put forth the idea of build a production company, it was to utilize the profit, to change the profit structure in such a way that the rewards aren't just pushed up to the top and then trickle down to the rest. The rewards are pushed into more work. I wonder if that's not the way Bezos built originally, because for a long time I remember him doing interviews that are like, so are you going to start to make money? And he's like, that's not the point, get bigger. What if that is the model that represents what we need to do going forward? But anyways, my original idea was to build the production company to finance the growth of building a new world. There are a bunch of ideas. It seems like our world is built with an innate vulnerability that if you actually wanted to do good, your ability to do good is greater enhanced by the amount of bullshit you're up against. It seems to be a vulnerability in what we have built. I'd say capitalize on that. take that vulnerability and make it work for us. Because while it may be the natural next step for me to share a dream, eventually that dream has to have tangible results. And if those results are generated using an archaic and defunct model, the one we're using now, then it's just going to be more of the same 2-3 generations from now. Can we build, not aiming for our own glorification? Can we build with the intent to be the growth of others as opposed to the recognition of ourselves? So if somebody does get this idea, have it. I'm not doing this to be famous or wealthy. Have it. Give me your perspective on it and go do what your talents allow you to do. I'd like to make sure that that is understood. Because I really think that we're just going to, even if we went down this path, there's a great amount of risk that has us devolving into what we do now. I think that it's probably been tried before at times and places in our history, probably way more than I'll ever know about. But it is probably, if it has been tried and failed, it probably failed after the person with the vision was gone and everybody else's ambitions took over. I think that requires us to have a level of transparency. If I were to somehow become the person that is able to build a part of this, then a transparency needs to be in place so that there can be continuity of the dream. I've talked for almost 50 minutes now. I don't know if I've said much. You don't really have control. I don't really have control over the words, the specific words when it comes to this. It's almost like they're not even your own. I've surprised myself on a couple of these things. Like, I never thought those thoughts, those words never arranged themselves that way, but there they are. That's what we need to inspire. That's our way out of this. And if maybe it just didn't occur to you before that you really need to have a better respect for this part of the creation. When I meditate, I saw this. All right, so now we're like 50 minutes in. I can just sort of free flow a little bit. I saw this preacher on YouTube. I don't know who it was, but I could find it because he's anti-Trump. And really, the way our algorithms work, if you wanted to find somebody that is in a specific vein, that's pretty much all you got to do is give it a couple keywords and you'll find them again. And the anti-Trump is irrelevant. But he talked about his life as a pastor, a preacher, an influencer of faith, about the value he has or he finds when he has time alone to meditate, reflect, and be with his Creator. When I am doing that, I find it's a lot easier to knock down that ego when you have the freedom to recognize it and not rely on it. If my motivations are purely the growth of consciousness, then ego is limited, because ego tends to, in this world, at least for me, ego tends towards, well, if I did it this way, then I could gain this. But if you are allowed that time to yourself for reflection and meditation, I think it's one of the only ways you can overcome that the greedy nature of our egos in this civilization. Our current economic models do not allow for more of that going forward. They allow for less of that. more time and energy spent on survival, less energy spent on enrichment. I think my coming to faith in this way gave me a little bit of a unique perspective in that regard. Because my introduction to God was all about this thing that is beyond comprehension. The only way to understand it is to understand how flawed I am. That perspective should change with redemption. To understand the flaws and have no recourse is not proper respect for this part of the creation. I shouldn't talk about scripture and stuff like that, but I think that shift is important. When I first started doing this, I said outright that I am looking for vulnerabilities that can allow for the big changes. And I think that that's one of them. That is a lever, a gate, whatever you want to call it. Affecting and working on that vulnerability, I think, is going to make a big change in our world. So for any thinkers that have made it this far into the video, using your special talents, I just want to allow you to recognize that vulnerability. All right. Thank you. I realize I have taken up a lot of your precious time. Thank you for giving me that. I hope it helped. And while I call likes and shares and views consequences, if I was able to help, share. I really don't see everybody else that does YouTube videos, they do this thing where it's like a natural part of the function of growing their brand is to require likes, follows, shares, all that. I don't want it if it's just going to be popularity, but if it can help, I'll accept those consequences. I don't need to. I'm very lucky. I can sustain myself via my skills in the workforce. And I am not a materialistic person. I don't have things. Those aren't what I dream about. If I could change something in us that isn't specific to respecting the creation, it's that. I would encourage the lack of desire for the things, the lack of determining your self-worth based on how many people agree with you or are influenced by you. And if I've found somebody that is in a position to create this story and share this story, please do. What you create will influence me. Future talks may be changed completely based on your work. Sorry about that. At least the cicadas haven't been terrible. Just having said that, I really like them. I have found that this cicada summer we are in is really good for tinnitus. If you're someone like me who meditates and there are cicadas just singing around you, I don't know, are they singing? Are they screaming? Are they shouting? Are they trying to mate? What are they trying to... Anyway, I haven't researched that. But that constant ringing in my ears that leads to so many migraines, I find they're soothing if you can focus on them. I like to think to myself that I am listening to them talk to each other when one goes off for a minute, another one goes off for a minute, another one goes off for a minute. But I've actually learned to enjoy them. Completely irrelevant, just something about me. All right. thank you. I will try not to make it so long before I do another video, but this stuff comes when it comes. So I hope I helped. Thank you.